In the summer of 1972, the world was carved into two halves that barely spoke the same language. American missiles faced Soviet missiles. Proxy wars smoldered across continents, and every contest between East and West carried the weight of an entire ideology. Even a board game could become a battlefield. And for more than 2 decades, that particular battlefield had belonged entirely to one side. Since the end of the Second World War, the Soviet Union had ruled the chess world like a private empire. But Vinnik, Smyslov, Tal, Petrosian, Spassky, an unbroken dynasty of champions, all wearing the same red banner, all products of a vast state machine that trained its grandmasters the way other nations trained soldiers. Chess in the USSR was not a hobby. It was proof of the superior mind, evidence that the socialist system bred deeper thinkers than the decadent West. No American had seriously threatened that supremacy in living memory. Then came a strange, furious young man from Brooklyn. Bobby Fischer had been a prodigy since childhood, a boy who taught himself the game from the instructions in a cardboard set and never quite belonged anywhere else again. By 13, he had produced what the world called the game of the century. By 15, he was the youngest grandmaster the planet had ever seen. He was brilliant and impossible in equal measure, paranoid about lighting, about noise, about money, about the Russians he was convinced were colluding against him. And in a way, he was right. But in 1971, something happened that nobody had ever witnessed. In the candidates' matches to decide who would challenge for the world title, Fischer didn't just win. He annihilated. He swept Mark Taimanov 6-0, a result so total it was supposed to be statistically impossible at that level. Then he did it again, 6-0, against the great Danish Grandmaster Bent Larsen. 12 straight wins against elite opposition, a streak so surreal that grandmasters watching could scarcely believe it was real. Finally, he dispatched former champion Tigran Petrosian to claim his prize. One man, alone, with no federation behind him and no team of seconds, had clawed his way to the doorstep of the Soviet Empire. Waiting on the other side stood the champion himself, Boris Spassky. Boris Spassky was everything Fischer was not: gracious, cultured, a sportsman beloved even by his rivals. The match was set for Reykjavik, Iceland, in the summer of 1972, a neutral patch of volcanic rock between two superpowers. The whole world was watching. And then, with the eyes of the planet fixed on Iceland, Bobby Fischer simply refused to come. The demands poured out of him like water through a broken dam. The prize fund wasn't large enough. The cameras were too intrusive. The conditions, the lighting, the share of gate receipts, nothing satisfied him. Spassky waited in Reykjavik while his challenger sat in New York, missing flight after flight. The opening ceremony came and went without Fischer in the building. For a few agonizing days, it looked as though the match of the century would never be played at all, collapsing in a farce before a single pawn had moved. What saved it was a British financier named Jim Slater, who threw another $125,000 onto the pile, doubling the purse and stripping away Fischer's excuse with a single dare. Now come out and play. Chicken, the message effectively read. And there was reportedly a phone call, too, from Henry Kissinger himself, the U.S. National Security Advisor, urging Fischer to go and fight for his country. Whether it was the money or the patriotism or simply that he had run out of reasons, Fischer finally boarded the plane. But the chaos was only beginning. In Game 1, in a dead-drawn endgame that any club player could have held, Fischer reached out and grabbed a poisoned pawn with his bishop, trapping his own piece against the edge of the board. Spassky pounced, and Fischer lost a game he never should have lost. It was a catastrophe, and it confirmed every fear about whether he belonged on this stage. Then it got worse. Furious about the television cameras whirring in the hall, Fischer refused to appear for Game 2 at all. The clock ticked down, The arbiter waited, and at last the game was declared a forfeit. 2 games gone, and Fischer trailed 2-0 against the best player in the world, a hole from which, history insisted, no challenger had ever climbed out. Down 2-0, with one of those points handed over without a fight, Fischer did what he always did when cornered. He made another demand. He would not play in the main hall, not with the cameras humming and the crowd breathing down his neck. He wanted Game 3 moved to a small back room behind the stage, a converted storage space barely fit for table tennis. It was an outrageous request, and by every measure of competitive logic, Spassky should have refused. The champion held all the leverage. Instead, in a gesture of sportsmanship that some Soviet officials would never forgive, Spassky agreed to walk away from his commanding hall and sit down in that cramped little chamber. And there, in the back room, the tide turned. Game 3 saw Fischer wheel out a sharp, slightly unsound-looking knight maneuver in a modern Benoni, and for the first time in his entire career, after years of draws and losses and frustration, Bobby Fischer beat Boris Spassky over the board. The psychological dam broke in that instant. The man who had seemed determined to sabotage himself suddenly remembered he was the most dangerous player alive. The comeback gathered speed, and it crested in Game 6, a game that chess players still speak of in hushed tones. Fischer, who had built his entire reputation on 1.e4, the king's pawn, the aggressive thrust he'd played almost his whole life, sat down and pushed his queen's pawn instead. It was a move out of character, a feint that left Spassky's preparation useless. What followed was not a brawl, but a slow, suffocating work of art. A queen's gambit declined handled with such clarity and precision that it looked less like a fight than a demonstration. Fischer maneuvered, traded, and pressed until Spassky's position simply crumbled. When it was over, something extraordinary happened. The crowd applauded as crowds do, but so did Spassky. The world champion rose from his chair and clapped for the man who had just beaten him, paying tribute to a masterpiece he himself had been forced to witness from the wrong side of the board. From 2 games down and the brink of humiliation, Fischer had not merely clawed back into the match. He had seized control of it. After Game 6, the outcome felt less like a contest than a coronation in slow motion. Fischer kept winning, kept pressing, kept turning Spassky's once fearsome preparation into so much wasted paper. By the time Game 21 was adjourned, the arithmetic was merciless. Spassky telephoned the arbiter to resign rather than return to the board, and on the 1st of September, 1972, Bobby Fischer was champion of the world. 24 years of unbroken Soviet dominion. But Vinnik, Smyslov, Tal, Petrosian, Spassky ended in a hall in Reykjavik at the hands of a single, solitary American who had arrived with nothing but his genius and his grievances. Overnight, he was the most famous chess player who had ever lived. He appeared on magazine covers, on talk shows, in living rooms that had never owned a chessboard. He had made chess, for one strange and luminous moment, the most important game on earth. And then he simply walked away. When the time came in 1975 to defend his title against the young Soviet Anatoly Karpov, Fischer issued a list of demands, and when Fide refused to meet every one, he refused to play. The crown was handed to Karpov without a single move being made. The greatest player in the world had become a ghost, vanishing into a wandering, paranoid exile that stretched across decades. No tournaments, no games, only rumors and reclusion, and a mind turning ever inward on its own dark corridors. He surfaced only once, in 1992, for a bizarre rematch against the very man he had dethroned. Spassky, by then long past his prime, agreed to face him again in war-torn Yugoslavia, in defiance of American sanctions, a defiance that would see Fischer indicted and unable ever to return home. The chess was rusty, the spectacle melancholy, yet something tender lingered between them. The two old rivals, who had once carried the weight of two empires onto a stage, had quietly become friends, and remained so until Fischer's death in 2008, with Spassky among those who mourned him. It is the cruelest of paradoxes. The match that made Fischer immortal was also the summit from which he could only descend, a triumph so total that the genius behind it had, in some sense, nowhere left to go.